"How for an inn?" cried Peter as they stepped into the city. "Be brisk, my fine fellows." The boys soon found an unpretending establishment near Broad Street, with a funnily painted lion over the door. This was Red Lion, kept by one Huygens Cleef, a stout Dutchman with short legs and a very long pipe. By this time, they were in a ravenous condition. The tiffin taken at Haarlem had served only to give them an appetite, and this had been heightened by their exercise and swift sail upon the canal. "Come, mine host, give us what you can," cried Peter. "I can give you anything." "Everything," answered Mynheer Kleef, performing a difficult bow. "Well, give us sausage and pudding." "Ah, mynheer, the sausage is all gone. There is no pudding." "Kalmangundi, then, and plenty of it." "That is out also, young master." "Eggs, then be quick." "Winter eggs are very poor eating," answered the innkeeper, puckering his lips and lifting his eyebrows. "No eggs? Well, caviar." The Dutchman raised his fat hands. "Caviar? That is made of gold. Who has caviar to sell?" Peter had sometimes eaten it at home. He knew that it was made of the roe of the sturgeon and certain other large fish, but he had no idea of its cost. "Well, mine host, what have you?" "What have I?" "Everything. I've rye bread, sauerkraut, potato salad, and fattest herring at Leyden." "What do you say, boys?" asked the captain. "Will that do?" "Yes," cried the famished youth, "if you'll only be quick." Mynheer moved off like one walking in his sleep, but soon opened his eyes wide at the miraculous manner in which his herring were made to disappear. Next came, or rather went, potato salad, rye bread, and coffee. Then Utrecht water flavored with orange, and finally slices of dry gingerbread. This last delicacy was not on the regular bill of fare, but Mynheer Kleef, driven to extremes, solemnly produced it from his own private stores, and gave only a placid blink when his voracious young travelers started up, declaring they had eaten enough. "I should think so," he exclaimed internally, but his smooth face gave no sign. Softly rubbing his hands, he asked, "Will your worships have beds?" "Will your worships have beds?" mocked Karl. "What do you mean? Do we look sleepy?" "Not at all, master, but I would cause them to be warmed and aired. None sleep under damp sheets at the Red Lion." "Ah, I understand. Shall we come back here to sleep, Captain?" Peter was accustomed to finer lodgings, but this was a frolic. "Why not?" he replied. "We can fare excellently here." "Your worship speaks only the truth," said Mynheer, with great deference. "How fine to be called your worship," laughed Ludwig aside to Lambert, while Peter replied, "Well, mine host, you may get the rooms ready by 9. I have one beautiful chamber with 3 beds. That will hold all of your worships," said Mynheer Keefe coaxingly. "And that will do." "Whew!" whistled Karl when they reached the street. Ludwig started. "What now?" "Nothing. Only Mynheer Kleef of the Red Lion little thinks how we shall make things spin in that same room tonight. We'll set the bolsters flying." "Order!" cried the captain. "Now, boys, I must seek this great Dr. Boykman before I sleep. If he is in Leyden, it will be no great task to find him, for he always puts up at the Golden Eagle when he comes here. I wonder that you did not all go to bed at once. Still, as you are awake, what say you to walking with Ben up by the museum or the Stadthuis?" "Agreed," said Ludwig and Lambert, but Jacob preferred to go with Peter. In vain Ben tried to persuade him to remain at the inn and rest. He declared he never felt better, and wished of all things to take a look at the city, for it was his first stop at Leyden. "Oh, it will do him no harm," said Lambert. "How long today has been, and what glorious sport we've had! It hardly seems possible that we left Broek only this morning." Jacob yawned. "I've enjoyed it well," he said. "But it seems to me at least a week since we started." Karl laughed and muttered something about 20 naps. "Here we are at the corner. Remember, we all meet at the Red Lion at 8, said the captain, as he and Jacob walked away. The boys were glad to find a blazing fire awaiting them upon their return to the Red Lion. Carl and his party were there first. Soon afterward, Peter and Jacob came in. They had inquired in vain concerning Dr. Boykman. All they could ascertain was that he had been seen in Harlem that morning. As for his being in Leiden, the landlord of Golden Eagle had said to Peter, "The thing is impossible. He always lodges here when in town. By this time there would be a crowd at my door waiting to consult him. Bah! People make such fools of themselves." "He is called a great surgeon," said Peter. "Yes, the greatest in Holland. But what of that? What of being the greatest pill choker and knife slasher in the world? That man is a bear. Only last month, on this very spot, he called me a pig before 3 customers. "No," exclaimed Peter, trying to look surprised and indignant. "Yes, master. A pig," repeated the landlord, puffing at his pipe with an injured air. "Bah! If he did not pay fine prices and bring customers to my house, I would sooner see him in the Vlet Canal than to give him lodgment." Perhaps mine host felt that he was speaking too openly to a stranger, or it may be he saw a smile lurking in Peter's face, for he added sharply, "Come now. What more do you wish? Supper? Beds?" "Oh, mein Herr, I am but searching for Dr. Boykman." "Go find him. He's not in Leiden." Peter was not put off so easily. After receiving a few more rough words, he succeeded in obtaining permission to leave a note for the famous surgeon, or rather, he bought from his amiable landlord the privilege of writing it there and a promise that it would be promptly delivered when Dr. Boykman arrived. This accomplished, Peter and Jacob returned to the Red Lion. This inn had once been a fine house, the home of a rich burgher, and having grown old and shabby, it had passed through many hands until finally it had fallen into the possession of Mynheer Kleef. He was fond of saying, as he looked up at its dingy, broken walls, "Mend it, and paint it, and there's not a prettier house in Leiden." It stood 6 stories high from the street. The first 3 were of equal breadth, but of various heights. The last 3 were in the great high roof and grew smaller and smaller like a set of double steps, until the top one was lost in a point. The roof was built of short, shiny tiles, and the windows, with their little panes, seemed to be scattered irregularly over the face of the building, without the slightest attention to outward effect. But the public room on the ground floor was a landlord's joy and pride. He never said, "Mend it and paint it there," for everything was in the highest condition of Dutch neatness and order. If you will but open your mind's eye, you may look into the apartment. Imagine a large, bare room with a floor that seemed to be made of squares cut out of glazed earthen pie dishes. First a yellow piece, then a red, until the whole looked like a vast checkerboard. Fancy a dozen high-backed wooden chairs standing around, then a great hollow chimney place all aglow with its blazing fire, reflected 100 times in the polished steel fire dogs, a tiled hearth, tiled sides, tiled top, with a Dutch sentence upon it, and over all, high above one's head, a narrow mantel-shelf, filled with shining brass candlesticks, pipe lighters, and tinder-boxes. Then see, in one end of the room, 3 pine tables, in the other, a closet and a deal dresser. The latter is filled with mugs, dishes, pipes, tankards, earthen and glass bottles, and is guarded at one end with a brass-hooped keg standing upon lone legs. Everything dim with tobacco smoke, but otherwise clean as soap and sand can make it. Next, picture 2 sleepy, shabby-looking men in wooden shoes seated near the glowing fireplace, hugging their knees and smoking short, stumpy pipes. Mynheer Kleef, walking softly and heavily about, clad in leather knee-breeches, felt shoes, and a green jacket wider than it is long. Then throw a heap of skates in the corner and put 6 tired, well-dressed boys in various attitudes upon the wooden chairs, and you will see the coffee room of the Red Lion just as it appeared at 9 o'clock on the evening of December 6, 1840. For supper, gingerbread again, slices of Dutch sausage, rye bread sprinkled with anise seed, pickles, a bottle of Utrecht water, and a pot of very mysterious coffee. The boys were ravenous enough to take all they could get and pronounce it excellent. Ben made wry faces, but Jacob declared he had never eaten a better meal. After they had laughed and talked a while and counted their money by way of settling a discussion that rose concerning their expenses, the captain marched his company off to bed, led on by a greasy pioneer boy who carried skates and the candlestick instead of an axe. One of the ill-favored men by the fire had shuffled toward the dresser and was ordering a mug of beer just as Ludwig brought up the rear and was stepping from the apartment. "I don't like that fellow's eye," he whispered to Carl. "He looks like a pirate, or something of that kind." "It looks like a granny," answered Carl in sleepy disdain. Ludwig laughed uneasily. "Granny or no granny," he whispered, "I tell you, he looks like one of those men in the Bootsspulen." "Pooh," sneered Carl. "I knew it. That picture was too much for you. Look sharp now, and see if yon fellow with the candle doesn't look like the other villain. No, indeed. His face is as honest as Gouda cheese. But I say, Carl, that really was a horrid picture." "Why did you stare at it so long for?" "I couldn't help it." By this time the boys had reached the beautiful room with 3 beds in it. A dumpy little maiden with long earrings met them at the doorway, dropped them a curtsy, and passed out. She carried a long-handled thing that resembled a frying pan with a cover. "I'm glad to see that," said Van Moonen to Ben. "What?" "Why, the warming pan. It's full of hot ashes. She's been heating our beds." "Oh, a warming pan, eh? Much obliged to her, I'm sure," said Ben, too sleepy to make any further comment. Meantime, Ludwig still talked of the picture that had made such a strong impression upon him. He had seen it in a shop window during their walk. It was a poorly painted thing, representing 2 men tied back to back, standing on shipboard, surrounded by a group of seamen who were preparing to cast them together into the sea. This mode of putting prisoners to death was called Bootsspulen, or feet washing, and was practiced by the Dutch upon the pirates of Dunkirk in 1605, and again by the Spaniards upon the Dutch in the horrible massacre that followed the siege of Haarlem. Bad as the painting was, the expression upon the pirates' faces was well given, sullen and despairing as they seemed. They wore such a cruel, malignant aspect that Ludwig had felt a secret satisfaction in contemplating their helpless condition. He might have forgotten the scene by this time, but for that ill-looking man by the fire. Now, while he capered about boy-like and threw himself with an antic into his bed, he inwardly hoped that the Bootsspulen would not haunt his dreams. It was a cold, cheerless room. A fire had been newly kindled in the burnished stove, and seemed to shiver even while it was trying to burn. The windows with their funny little panes were bare and shiny, and the cold waxed floor looked like a sheet of yellow ice. 3 rush-bottomed chairs stood stiffly against the wall, alternating with 3 narrow wooden bedsteads that made the room look like a deserted ward of a hospital. At other times, the boys would have found it quite impossible to sleep in pairs, especially in such narrow quarters, but tonight they lost all fear of being crowded and longed only to lay their weary bodies upon the feather beds that lay lightly upon each cot. Had the boys been in Germany instead of Holland, they might have been covered also by a bed of down or feathers. This peculiar form of luxury was at that time adopted only by the wealthy or the different Hollanders. Ludwig, as we've seen, had not quite lost his friskiness, but the other boys, after 1 or 2 feeble attempts at pillow firing, composed themselves for the night with the greatest dignity. Nothing like fatigue for making boys behave themselves. "Good night, boys," said Peter's voice from under the cover. "Good night," called back everyone but Jacob, who already lay snoring beside the captain. "I say," said Carl after a moment, "don't sneeze, anybody. Ludwig's in a fright." "No such thing," retorted Ludwig in a smothered voice. Then there was a little whispered dispute, which was ended by Carl saying, "For my part, I don't know what fear is, but you really are a timid fellow, Ludwig." Ludwig grunted sleepily, but made no further reply. In the middle of the night, the fire had shivered itself to death, and in place of its gleams, little squares of moonlight lay upon the floor, slowly, slowly shifting their way across the room. Something else was moving also, but they did not see it. Sleeping boys keep but a poor lookout. During the early hours of the night, Jacob Poot had been gradually but surely winding himself with all the bed covers. He now lay like a monster chrysalis beside the half-frozen Peter, who accordingly was skating with all his might over the coldest, bleakest of dreamland icebergs. Something else, I say, besides the moonlight, was moving across the bare, polished floor, moving not quite so slowly, but quite as stealthily. "Wake up, Ludwig. Boat-spoiling pirate is growing real." No, Ludwig does not waken, but he moans in his sleep. Does not Carl hear it? Carl the brave, the fearless? No, Carl is dreaming of the race. And Jacob, Van Moonen, Ben? No, they too are dreaming of the race. And Katrinka is singing through their dreams, laughing, flitting past them. Now and then a wave from the great organ surges through their midst. Still, the thing moves, slowly, slowly. "Peter! Captain Peter! There is danger!" Peter heard no call, but in his dream he slid a few thousand feet from one iceberg to another, and the shock awoke him. Phew! He was cold. How cold he was! He gave a hopeless, desperate tug at the chrysalis. In vain. Sheet, blanket, and spread were firmly wound about Jacob's inanimate form. Peter looked drowsily toward the window. Clear moonlight, he thought. We shall have pleasant weather tomorrow. Hello? What's that? He saw the moving thing, or rather something black crouching upon the floor, for it had halted as Peter stirred. He watched in silence. Soon it moved again, nearer and nearer. It was a man, crawling upon his hands and feet. The captain's first impulse was to call out, but he took an instant to consider matters. The creeper had a shining knife in one hand. This was ugly. But Peter was naturally self-possessed. When the head turned, Peter's eyes were closed as if in sleep, but at other times nothing could be keener, sharper than the captain's gaze. Closer, closer crept the robber. His back was very near Peter now. The knife was laid softly upon the floor. One careful arm reached forth stealthily to drag the clothes from the chair by the captain's bed. The robbery was commenced. Now was Peter's time. Holding his breath, he sprang up and leaped with all his strength upon the robber's back, stunning the rascal with the force of the blow. To seize the knife was but a second's work. The robber began to struggle, but Peter sat like a giant astride the prostrate form. "If you stir," said the brave boy in as terrible a voice as he could command, "stir but 1 inch, and I will plunge this knife into your neck." "Boys! Boys! Wake up!" he shouted. still pressing down the black head and holding the knife at a pricking distance. "Give us a hand! I've got him!" The chrysalis rolled over, but made no other sign. "Up, boys!" cried Peter, never budging. "Ludwig, Lambert, Thunder! All of you are dead!" Dead? Not they. Van Moonen and Ben were on their feet in an instant. "Hey, what now?" "I've got a robber here," said Peter coolly. "Lie still, you scoundrel, or I'll slice off your head. Now, boys, cut out your bed cord. Plenty of time. He's a dead man if he stirs." Peter felt that he weighed 1,000 pounds. So he did, with that knife in his hand. The man growled and swore, but dared not move. Ludwig was up by this time. He had a great jackknife, the pride of his heart, in his breeches pocket. It could do good service now. They bared the bedstead in a moment. It was laced backward and forward with the rope. "I'll cut it," cried Ludwig, sawing away at the knot. "Hold him tight, Peter." "Never fear," answered the captain, giving the robber a warning prick. The boys were soon pulling at the rope like good fellows. It was out at last, a long, stout piece. "Now, boys," commanded the captain, "lift up his rascally arms. Cross his hands over his back. That's right. Excuse me for being in the way. Tie them tight." "Yes, and his feet, too, the villain," cried the boys in great excitement, tying knot after knot with Herculean jerks. The prisoner changed his tone. "Oh, oh," he moaned. "Spare a poor sick man. I was walking in my sleep." "Ugh," grunted Lambert, still tugging away at the rope. "Asleep, were you? Well, we'll wake you up." The man muttered fierce oaths underneath his teeth, then cried in a piteous cry, "Unbind me, you young masters. I have 5 little children at home. By Saint Bavon, I swear to give you each a 10 guilder piece if you will but free me." "Ha, ha, ha!" laughed Peter. "Ha, ha!" laughed the other boys. Then came threats. Threats that made Ludwig fairly shudder, though he continued to bind and tie with redoubled energy. "Hold up, mein Herr, housebreaker," said Van Moonen. "That knife is very near your throat. If you make the captain nervous, there's no telling what may happen." The robber took the hint and fell into sullen silence. Just at this moment the chrysalis upon the bed stirred and sat erect. "What's the matter?" he asked, without opening his eyes. "Matter?" echoed Ludwig, half trembling, half laughing. "Get up, Jacob. Here's work for you. Sit on this fellow. Sit on this fellow while we get into our clothes. We're half perished." "What feller?" "Zonder." "Hurrah for Put!" cried all the boys as Jacob, sliding quickly to the floor, bedclothes and all, took in the state of affairs at a glance and sat heavily beside Peter on the robber's back. Oh, didn't the fellow groan then? "No use holding him down any longer, boys," said Peter, rising, but bending as he did so to draw a pistol from the man's belt. "You see, I've been keeping guard over this pretty little weapon for the last 10 minutes. It's cocked, and the least wiggle might set it off. No danger now. I must dress myself. You and I, Lambert, will go for the police. I'd no idea it was so cold." "Where's Carl?" asked one of the boys. They looked at one another. Carl certainly was not among them. "Oh," cried Ludwig, frightened at last. "Where is he? Perhaps he had a fight with a robber and got killed." "Not a bit of it," said Peter quietly as he buttoned his stout jacket. "Look under the beds." They did so, and Carl was not there. Just then they heard a commotion on the stairway. Ben hastened to open the door. The landlord almost tumbled in. He was armed with a big blunderbuss. 2 or 3 lodgers followed, then the daughter with an upraised frying pan in one hand and a candle in the other. Behind her, looking pale and frightened, the gallant Carl.